Hello, and welcome to Sarastro's Painting. In this video I'll be sharing my current approach to painting the bases for the Star Wars Shatterpoint miniatures game by Atomic Mass Games. Regular viewers might know that for the base game I glued the figures to the bases before priming, which I then painted up by hand. And of course for other squads I also sometimes enjoy reworking the bases entirely to represent different environments from the Star Wars universe such as Endor and Geonosis. But in this video I'll be sharing a method for painting the bases as they are, using the airbrush to do most of the heavy lifting, giving fast, easy results that also look great on the table. Let's jump in. I'm first priming the bases in black, and you can of course use whatever your go-to primer might be. I'm using the aqueous black surfacer, which I'm thinning with a roughly equal amount of hobby colour thinner. I like this primer because I find it flows nicely and doesn't tend to cause blockages in the airbrush. I'm now going to mix a bluish grey tone, simply using some black, white and a little blue, and I'm using the Vallejo air colours for this. Even though the paints are pre-thinned, I still like to add a little thinner and a few drops of flow improver to help prevent blockages. I'm now mixing my black and white along with just a couple of drops of the blue. And we can of course control the saturation by adjusting the amount of black and white in the mix. There's no right or wrong here, and you might want to go darker or lighter depending on the ambience you're after, but this is essentially going to be the shadow tone. I'm now applying this evenly to the whole base, but from a fixed angle so as to leave some shadow in the recesses. I'm applying this in a couple of even layers, and there's nothing wrong with using a hairdryer to speed up the drying in between. I'm now adding some additional white to lighten the tone. Shooting from the same angle as before, I'm now aiming more towards the far side of the base, thus creating a gentle gradient. I'm aiming to cover around 2/3 of the base with this. It's a good idea to angle the airbrush in such a way as to cut across the various grooves, so we don't end up lightening the recesses. I'm now going lighter still to give the values one final boost. Once again shooting from the same angle as before, I'm now just hitting the furthest edge to complete a nice, pleasing gradient. Now the airbrush has done its work, I'm mixing a cool off-white, using white mixed with a touch of black and some Prussian blue, and using this to add a crisp edge highlight around the rim of each base with the side of the brush tip. For the desert or earthy parts of the bases, you could of course use whatever brown or sandy tones you like. Here I'm starting with some brown leather, wet blended into some orange leather. I'm then using a flat brush to bring up the opacity whilst leaving the cracks and recesses nice and dark. Finally, I'm mixing some Iroko into the orange leather and really bringing out those textures with a good bit of overbrushing and dry brushing. This kind of thing is also a whole lot easier to do without the figure being attached to the base. And once again, I want a nicely defined edge highlight around the rim, and I ended up adding some white sands to the Iroko for this. Finally, I'm painting the outer rims of the bases, and I like quite a matte black for this. I'll typically apply this in a couple of layers to achieve smooth, solid coverage. You could also go in and further darken some of these channels and recesses if you like, but this is good enough for me. I'm now going to add some protection with some ultra matte varnish, which can be applied with either a brush or the airbrush. I'm adding a little thinner and using the airbrush to speed things along. I'll typically then simply superglue the finished model down on top. If you want a stronger bond, however, you could first scrape the point of contact back down to the plastic, and I'm using the Citadel mold line remover to do this, to ensure we're gluing plastic to plastic. If it looks like you have too much glue on the feet, it's a good idea to soak some up before gluing the figure down to keep things clean. And this completes my approach to painting the bases from Star Wars Shatterpoint. Thank you for joining me, and special thanks go to my kind patrons for funding this work. Join me again soon, and happy painting!